Here we go, example number 3. Factor 8x to the fourth plus 2x minus 3. Now don't worry too much about these exponent values here. As long as these are even and multiples, then it'll work out. But if they're odd, then there's other things that you might have to look at first. So right now we know they're even and we can just continue working. Everything will kind of work itself out. So we look at this, we see that there is a number out in front of this x term, x to the fourth term in this case. This would be a, negative 3 would be c. So I'm looking for two numbers that when multiplied together give me a times c, which is 8 times negative 3, which is negative 24. And those same two numbers add together to give me b, which is 2. So two numbers that when multiplied together give me a times c, in this case negative 24, add together to give me b, which is 2. Now that I've got that, I look, okay, well, what are my factors of negative 24? 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. Okay, well, I know that my answer of the product has to be negative 24. So one of these has to be a negative value. 1 and 24, one of them has to be negative. 3 and 8, one of them has to be negative. My value for the sum, when I add them together, is positive, a positive 2, which means the bigger value has to be the positive. The littler, or the smaller one, has to be the negative. Because I need to, when I add them together, I have to end up with a positive, so it's got to be bigger. So each of these has to be the negative value. So let's check our products and sums. Product of 1 times 24, negative 24. So that works so far. But my sum, when I add them together, gives me 23. So that combination I know is not going to work. Negative 2 times 12 is negative 24. So that works. But my sum, positive 10. This is not our integer combination. Negative 3 and 8 is negative 24. But when added together, it gives me 5. This is not our combination. Negative 4 and 6 is negative 24. And when I add them together, I get 2. I'm going, nice. There is my integer set for this combination. Negative 4 times positive 6 is negative 24. Negative 4 plus positive 6 is 2. That part is done. There's my two values. Now I take those two values and I decompose. I split up my middle term into those two values. I go 8x to the fourth. I'm going to write plus 6x minus 4x minus 3. Because there's one little trick I need to show you about factoring by grouping like this. So I've got my two numbers. I've looked at a times c and I've looked at b. I've got my combination. I've decomposed. My next step is factor by grouping, or t factor. Mark your little t, and I look at my first set. I go, okay, what is my greatest common factor of my first two terms? I know both of those are going to divide by 2. I know that I can also, oh, you know what I forgot? I forgot that these are squareds. 6x squared plus 4x squared is 2x squared. So don't forget that that stays the same. Just adding like terms, so that has to be the same. So back over here at my factors, I know 8 and 6 are both going to divide by 2. I know that x to the fourth and x squared are both going to divide by x squared. When I do that, I'm going to get 4x squared, 4x squared, and 3 plus 3. I'll look over at my next one. What's common between 4x squared and 3? Well, nothing. Okay, so I have to factor out a 1, but here's what I need to show you. If ever this term here is negative, 99% of the time you need to factor out a negative. Okay, so if I factor out a negative 1, negative 4x squared divided by negative 1 gives me positive 4x squared. Negative 3 divided by or factored out by a negative 1 gives me positive 3. Now you see, if we had not have factored out a negative, these would not have been the same. Now they're the same. So I say 4x squared plus 3 is one factor. What am I left with? 2x squared minus 1, my other factor. Brackets are important on these binomial factors, because if you don't put brackets on it, it actually means it's something else. So make sure you remember your brackets. And there's example 3. Complete.